He's just a driver, and yet he dresses like he's heading to a meeting with a bank executive. That was the first thought that crossed Rachel Whitman's mind, CEO of a long-established fashion company, as the sleek black Mercedes silently pulled up in front of the mansion's gate. She glanced at her Rolex for the third time, then pulled open the heavy wooden door. Her heels clicked decisively against the marble floor with each step. The black man standing beside the car wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. His gaze was composed, his voice deep and professional. "Good morning, Ms. Whitman. I'm Jamal Carter. I'll be driving you to your meetings today." Rachel didn't shake his hand. She glanced at him, then walked straight toward the car. Finally. "I have 3 important meetings today. Let's hope you don't make me late." "I've reviewed your schedule and selected the most optimal route," Jamal replied without the slightest tremor in his voice. He opened the door for her with the precision of someone who had walked through thousands of high-level halls. But in Rachel's eyes, he was still just a man who didn't belong. As the car rolled through the gates, she called her assistant. "Sarah, make a note, run a background check on the new driver." "I don't want any surprises. People like that sometimes have dirty histories." Jamal heard every word, but his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. He was used to that kind of prejudice, far too used to it. But what made his grip tighten slightly on the steering wheel wasn't what Rachel said, it was the tone she used to say it. "Oh, and one more thing," Rachel continued loud enough for him to hear. "Remind him that his job is to drive, not to offer opinions. I don't need help staff chiming in." Jamal said nothing, not because he was weak, but because he had spoken up before and had been knocked down for it. 3 years ago, he had been the only one in the U.S. State Department willing to call out bias during a trade deal with Nigerian representatives. The phone call he made that day in Hausa became the perfect excuse to push him out. "That language doesn't sound trustworthy," his superior had once said. At the time, he chose to walk away in silence. But today, as he caught Rachel's gaze in the rearview mirror, a look of suspicion mixed with smugness. Jamal knew he wouldn't let it happen again. Not this time. The air in October was colder than usual. The trees along Riverside Avenue had just turned gold, and the wind was already sweeping their leaves into the sky. Inside the sealed cabin, soft jazz played quietly on the radio, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. Rachel Whitman sat in the back, eyes glued to her phone screen. A few messages from her investment advisor were agitating her. The Spanish investor wants to revise the terms of collaboration. They're requesting someone with a deep understanding of local business culture. She jabbed at her phone in frustration and then heard Jamal's voice from the front. But this time, it wasn't English. "W diang le dan, kuang gaosu, ti men rugu bu zanjong si guan, jubuneng xiezuo." The sentence spoken in Mandarin was clear, fluent, and almost native. Rachel looked up. She frowned. "What was that?" "Just a personal call, ma'am," Jamal replied calmly. Sounded like Chinese. "Where did you learn that Jamal didn't turn around? I used to work in several Asian countries. A driver who used to work overseas." Rachel smirked. "Sounds like a movie plot." She didn't wait for a reply. Her hand had already reached for her earpiece when her phone rang again. Jamal glanced at the screen. A name popped up, Dr. Amara Okoye. He hesitated for a second, then answered. "Sanu Amara. Yaya Aiki Kai Jamal. I just saw your report. Incredible work. The cultural risk matrix you outlined saved us in Abuja. I owe you big time." Rachel squinted. It wasn't Chinese, and it wasn't English. It was something else. Rough. Harsh. Sounded like A rebel language. What are you speaking Hausa, ma'am? What's Hausa? Isn't that the language of Islamic extremists? The words dropped into the air like a cold blade. Jamal stayed silent. For a few seconds, the luxury car became a cage, and he once again was trapped inside someone else's prejudice. Do you know how many people get flagged for speaking languages like that I could call security right now? For all I know, you could be sharing something dangerous. I'm speaking with a human rights expert in Nigeria, ma'am. And I'm supposed to believe that Jamal gripped the steering wheel tightly. He had heard enough. Enough to remember a grand office with a national flag in the background, a place where he had once been trusted. Until the language he spoke made him a threat. They didn't need evidence. They only required a difference. And that time Jamal left. Silently. But today was different. Ms. Whitman, he said slowly, I understand there are things that make you feel unsafe. But language is not a crime. Rachel scoffed. You don't get it. The world is full of threats. I have every right to be cautious. I agree, Jamal replied. But there's a difference between caution and prejudice. She didn't respond. But in the rearview mirror, her eyes turned colder. That afternoon, when they arrived at the main office, Rachel snapped her phone shut and said curtly, I won't need you tomorrow. The service will send someone else. Because I know things you don't understand. Because I don't feel safe. Jamal nodded. You don't feel safe. In the presence of someone like me who understands too much. She slammed the door shut. Jamal drove off heart hollow, but this time it wasn't disappointment. It was resolved. The next morning, the fog still lingered among the treetops in front of the Whitman Group building. But inside Rachel, a storm was already brewing. She stood by the sixth-floor window, coffee cup in hand, eyes locked on the black Mercedes parked in the lot below. Jamal had come back. No one had asked him to. No one expected him. However, he still arrived on time, was polite, and made no complaints. Rachel stared at her reflection in the glass, a silent question circling in her mind. What does he want? She turned sharply and picked up the phone. Sarah. I want the full call history of the driver, Jamal Carter. Call the car service and request their call logs. They're allowed to check if the vehicle belongs to the company. Rachel. Sarah's voice hesitated. I think we're going too far. I don't need opinions. I need action. An hour later, Rachel got into the car. As usual, Jamal opened the door and gave a slight bow. Good morning, Ms. Whitman. Rachel took her seat in the back without a word. But this time, she didn't stay silent for long. I want to know. Why do you need to speak Arabic Chinese or whatever else I don't recognize? What does a driver need those for? Jamal looked into the rearview mirror. He could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of harm, but fear of things she couldn't understand. I have friends and colleagues from many countries, ma'am. Those are languages I learned through work. Rachel pressed her lips tightly. Or maybe you're hiding something. Are you contacting someone? Selling information? Or worse? Worse. Jamal raised an eyebrow. I'm not stupid, Carter. I've met people like you quiet on the outside, then using knowledge to infiltrate systems. Maybe you're trying to access my clients, or something related to security. I won't let my company be exposed. The accusation hit Jamal like a bucket of ice water. He exhaled gently. But inside, every cell was burning not from pain, but from the past, returning like smoke through a crack. He remembered a meeting at the State Department. He had presented a plan to bridge U.S. trade with West African businesses. A white advisor had leaned over and whispered behind his back. Careful. He's too close to the other side. might have an agenda. No evidence, no misconduct, just a black man who understood the world too well, and he had lost everything. That time he walked away, but today, Rachel had just ignited the flame he had spent 3 years trying to extinguish. He stopped the car, turned around. For the first time, his eyes met Rachel's without flinching, without yielding. "You're accusing me of being a spy, a threat, someone plotting something. Just because I speak languages you don't understand, I said it was possible. Caution never hurts." Jamal nodded slowly. "What if I were white with a PhD, with international experience? Would you call it a plot or prestige?" Rachel froze, but before she could respond, Jamal continued, "You once said, you're just a driver. But from this seat, I've heard the insults, the condescension. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I don't fit what you're used to." "Are you threatening me?" Rachel snapped. "No, ma'am. I'm showing you the truth you've refused to face. The truth is you're not afraid of me. You're afraid of facing someone you can't control." Silence, tense as a wire stretched to its breaking point. Rachel reached for her phone. Her hand trembled slightly. "I'll call the police. I'll call them first," Jamal replied, "and this time I won't leave quietly." He opened the door and stepped out, standing tall in the street, not retreating, not apologizing. Just a man, carrying truth and dignity. This wasn't the first time Jamal Carter had been pushed to society's margins, but this was the first time he didn't move. When the police arrived, Rachel Whitman approached with confident strides. Her face strained to appear composed, but her eyes betrayed something else: anxiety. "Officer, I called because I suspect one of my staff is engaging in suspicious activity. He speaks multiple foreign languages, makes international calls, and refuses to provide details when I asked. I'm concerned it may involve security risks or breach of employment terms." 2 officers, both white, glanced at Jamal. He stood upright, hands calmly folded in front of him. Voice unwavering. "My name is Jamal Carter. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm legally employed as a private driver. Ms. Whitman has no evidence of any wrongdoing. She heard me speaking Mandarin, Yoruba, Arabic, and assumed I was a threat." The older officer asked, "Can you provide the names of the people you've called?" Jamal pulled out his phone, opened the call log. Names appeared: Dr. Okoye, University of Lagos Ambassador Chun, Beijing Elena Petrov, Moscow Textile Group. They're all trade experts, researchers, and ambassadors I collaborated with during my time at the United Nations. The younger officer blinked. "You worked at the UN?" Jamal nodded. "I hold a PhD in international relations from Georgetown. I previously served as a cultural advisor for U.S. trade negotiations with countries across Africa, China, and Brazil." Rachel took a step back. Her hand clutched her purse as if she'd just opened a door without checking what was on the other side. The older officer turned to her. "Ma'am, we find no reasonable grounds to detain Mr. Carter. No unlawful activity has been confirmed. But I don't feel safe." "Feelings are not evidence, ma'am," the officer replied gently but firmly. Rachel said nothing more. She stood motionless. And for the first time, Jamal saw her eyes lower. As the police car pulled away, Jamal turned back and looked Rachel in the eye. 3 years ago, I was forced out of my diplomatic post for speaking Hausa in a meeting. No one asked what I was saying. No one defended me. They looked at my skin and wrote their own story. "I'm sorry," Rachel murmured. "No, you're not sorry for what you did." Jamal said, his tone softer but no less resolute. "You're sorry that this time I didn't stay silent." Rachel bit her lip. She had never been spoken to like that before. She was always in control of clients, staff, and situations, but she couldn't control the truth now standing in front of her. "I fired you," she said quietly. "Yes." Jamal nodded, and I left with dignity. Not because I lost, but because I refused to bow again. He turned and walked away without looking back. She watched him go, her chest heavy. And in that moment, Rachel Whitman knew she had lost something far more important than an employee. She had lost a truth she hadn't dared to face. 3 weeks later, Rachel sat in her office surrounded by blazing red reports. The Spanish investor had canceled. Partners refused to meet, citing a lack of cultural understanding. Pleas to expert consulting firms were all turned down. The timeline was too short. Sarah walked in and placed a fax on the desk. "Mr. Roberto Santos is requesting that a cultural expert familiar with Spanish customs accompany the meeting tomorrow. Otherwise, he'll withdraw entirely from the deal." Rachel clenched the fax in her hand. Then, like a bell ringing in her memory, she remembered. The gray suit, the composed eyes, the flawless Spanish pronunciation of the man she had once dismissed. Jamal Carter. Rachel Whitman couldn't sleep. That night, the penthouse in the heart of Manhattan felt too wide, too cold. The wind howled against the glass windows like a voice repeating every word she had once thrown at Jamal. Every look of suspicion, every burst of anger wrapped in the shell of executive authority. Throughout her career, she had weathered many crises, but never one that began inside her conscience. The next morning at exactly 7:45, Rachel was already in the car, not heading to a meeting, but waiting. Sarah approached holding a stack of documents. "We've contacted 4 international consulting firms. None of them is willing to take the job on such short notice. What about linguists?" 3 declined. 1 said, "You should hire the man you fired." Rachel looked up. Sarah hesitated. "You know, Jamal. He's not just a driver." At that exact moment in front of the Plaza Hotel, a sleek Cadillac pulled to a stop. Jamal Carter stepped out. Navy suit, leather briefcase, Bluetooth earpiece. He was speaking Spanish, but not in the mechanical way of someone who memorized lines. It was the voice of someone who had lived in the language. "Señora Petrov, entiendo sus preocupaciones. Pero le aseguro que la integración cultural no será un obstáculo, sino una ventaja. Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but I assure you cultural integration won't be an obstacle. It will be an advantage." Rachel couldn't take her eyes off him. Everything she once assumed was a performance now felt like an undeniable truth. The man she once saw as a threat was now the very person her company's future depended on. Her hand shook slightly as she picked up her phone, dialed the number. Jamal's voice came through after 3 rings. "Jamal Carter." "Good morning." Rachel swallowed hard. "It's me, Rachel Whitman." A long pause. "What do you need from me?" His voice wasn't angry, but there was a distance to it. I saw you this morning, at the hotel." "I heard you speak Spanish. She stopped. For the first time in her life, Rachel didn't know how to begin when pride was no longer a strong enough shield to cover her mistakes. "You truly know things I once believed were impossible. And I was wrong." Jamal remained silent. "I have a meeting with the Spanish investor. They requested someone who understands the culture. I can't afford to lose this deal. And I know I don't deserve to ask you." Her voice cracked. "But if If there's any grace left in you, if you believe in second chances, I need you. On the other end, Jamal strolled along the sidewalk, his eyes tracing the golden leaves lining the boulevard. He remembered. The years in UN meeting rooms where his words once bridged cultural misunderstandings. The hushed phone calls after being pushed aside. And Rachel's eyes that day when she said the words terrorist language. Jamal finally spoke. 3 years ago, I stayed silent. I let bias win. But that day when I stepped out of the car, it wasn't because I was angry with you. It was because I had learned that silence is a form of complicity. Rachel wept. She didn't hide it anymore. I lived my whole life in a world I thought was fair. And then I met you and realized I was blind. Do you need me? Because I have the skills, or because you want to fix a wrong? Rachel replied softly. Both. Jamal exhaled this time, not from weariness, but because a decision was taking shape. I'll help you. Rachel nearly collapsed back into her seat. But he continued this time. I'm not just here to be the emergency fix. I want agency, and I want to be recognized as someone who truly brings value. Rachel choked up. You are the most capable person I've ever met, and this time, I won't blind myself again. The cafe on 6th Avenue wasn't upscale. Wooden tables, warm yellow lights, and a quiet atmosphere enough to give truth a place to land. Rachel Whitman arrived early, her hair neatly pinned back, her gray suit without a single crease, but her hand still trembled slightly as she placed her tea on the table. She was waiting for someone, whom she had once dismissed from her car as if he had no name. The door opened. Jamal Carter entered, no longer the uniformed driver, but a man who walked with quiet control and solid purpose. White shirt, charcoal blazer, a tablet in one hand and a brown leather dossier in the other. He nodded a greeting and sat down. Rachel looked up at him, eyes swirling with things she hadn't yet found the words to say. Thank you for coming, she began. Jamal set the tablet down, but didn't reply right away. His gaze was calm, but carried the distillation of years spent in silence. Before we talk about the meeting, he said evenly, I think you need to understand who it was you fired. Rachel nodded quietly. I'm ready to listen. Jamal opened the folder. I graduated top of my class from Howard University, majoring in international relations. Then I received a full scholarship for a PhD at Georgetown, where I focused on cross-cultural trade. I worked at the State Department for 7 years, served as a cultural advisor for delegations in West Africa, East Asia, and Latin America. For a time, I coordinated with 12 embassies helping build trade bridges with local businesses. He paused. 3 years ago, I discovered a senior official accepting bribes to favor a foreign conglomerate. I reported it. A month later, I was reassigned and eventually removed from all briefings. Rachel's surprise was plain. They couldn't fire me outright. So they did the next best thing, cut my access, erased me from meeting schedules, and started whispering rumors that I was too close to African delegates. You stayed quiet, Rachel asked softly. At the time, I thought I needed space. I left the department, no lawsuits, no headlines. I chose driving because I needed to make a living. But I never gave up my dignity. Jamal looked directly at her. And then I met you. Not raised, not bitter, just a truth. Steady and sharp as a blade. Rachel raised her hand to her face. I saw a black man behind the wheel and believed you couldn't be more than that. You're not the first, Jamal said. But you're the first. Who needed me to save her company? The silence between them wasn't emptiness. It had become a mirror. Rachel looked up, her eyes red. I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came to begin again, but this time not from above. Jamal turned the tablet toward her. This is a cultural brief on Spain hospitality protocols, dialogue structures, topics to avoid, and topics to emphasize. Rachel scanned the dense pages, charts, and annotations. You prepared all of this. I've overseen more than 50 similar negotiations. This time, you don't just need a translator. You need someone who understands that in Spanish culture, personal relationships matter more than contracts. He pointed to a diagram. Start with family, ancestral honor. Don't jump into numbers. They need to know you truly respect them. Rachel exhaled sharply. I don't know if I can learn all this in 24 hours. You don't need to learn it all. You need to listen and let me guide you. A slight smile appeared on Jamal's lips, not one of forgiveness, but a gesture of partnership. Between two equals. The next morning, the conference room was arranged exactly as Jamal had outlined: round table, bilingual documents, equal seating, white chrysanthemums at the center, a symbol of respect in Spanish culture. Roberto Santos entered. Jamal rose, offering a slight bow. Bienvenidos, Señor Santos. Estamos muy honrados de tenerlo aquí. Welcome, Mr. Santos. We are deeply honored to have you here. The surprise on Roberto's face quickly gave way to a warm smile. Rachel stood behind Jamal, her hands trembling slightly. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was leading. She felt like she was being led by someone she now trusted. The faint sunlight of a November morning streamed through the glass windows, casting soft patterns across the surface of the walnut meeting table. Inside the spacious conference room, everything had been arranged precisely as Jamal Carter had designed it. Equal level seating, no head of the table. Bottled water imported from Galicia, the homeland of Roberto Santos, and a small tray of traditional almond pastries, a subtle yet meaningful welcome that needed no words. Roberto entered first. Two associates followed their expressions, serious yet tinged with curiosity. They had met many American CEOs, always in a rush, always chasing numbers, constantly shaking hands like they were conquering a market. But today, they saw a black man dressed in a dark suit standing patiently with respectful eyes, and his hand placed lightly over his chest as he greeted them. Señor Santos Jamal began in Spanish, his voice low and warm. Es un honor tenerlo con nosotros. Gracias por darnos su tiempo. Mr. Santos, it is an honor to have you with us. Thank you for your time. Roberto tilted his head slightly, then smiled. Usted habla español mejor que muchos de mis colegas en Madrid. You speak Spanish better than many of my colleagues in Madrid. Jamal smiled back. Porque no solo aprendí el idioma, sino también el respeto que lo acompaña. Because I didn't just learn the language, I knew the respect that comes with it. Rachel sat silently beside them, not interjecting. For the first time in a high-stakes meeting, she wasn't the one leading. And for the first time, she realized true power isn't about how much you speak, but knowing when to listen. Jamal guided the conversation gently, asking about Mr. Santos's family, his father, who still operated a traditional weaving workshop in Galicia, then weaving that into stories about the family values within Whitman Group's brand. He spoke of artisans who had worked with the company for over 30 years, stories never mentioned in financial reports. For us, Rachel added softly, partnership is more than just a contract. It's a promise between people, between tradition and a sustainable future. Roberto nodded slowly. He turned to Jamal es raro encontrar a alguien que entienda nuestra forma de ver el mundo. It's rare to meet someone who understands our way of seeing the world. Perhaps because I, too, have been misunderstood, Jamal replied this time in English. And I understand that to truly enter someone's world, sometimes you have to leave your shoes at the door. 2 hours passed. No elaborate presentations. No overhyped sales pitches. Just honest conversations about legacy, about respect and trust. At the end of the meeting, Roberto stood, shook Rachel's hand first, then turned to Jamal. "Mrs. Whitman," he said in accented English, "your advisor made me feel understood. And that is the most important thing in any international partnership." "I agree," Rachel replied, her eyes glistening. "I didn't understand that before, but today I've learned." Roberto gave a kind smile. "The contract will be signed, not just because of the numbers, but because of sincerity." The conference room door closed behind Mr. Santos. Rachel sank into her chair, exhaling like a weight had fallen from her chest. She turned to Jamal. "You just saved my company, with things I once thought didn't matter." Jamal was silent for a moment, then replied, "I didn't do it for you. I did it for the Spanish workers who deserve to be treated fairly, because fairness is a kind of language too. Anyone can understand it if they're willing to listen." In that moment, Rachel realized Jamal wasn't just a translator of language, he was a translator of empathy. And that was something no business school, no Ivy League degree had ever taught her. A few days after that historic meeting, Rachel Whitman walked into the executive office on the 23rd floor with something she'd never carried before: a deep, contemplative silence. Not the kind caused by numbers or shareholder meetings, but the type that appears when someone is finally facing their reflection. Ever since Jamal Carter re-entered her life, not through apology, not through demand, but through the quiet strength of ability and character that defied every mold she had trusted, Rachel had been forced to re-examine the entire system she once proudly commanded. One morning she invited Jamal to her office, not in the parking lot, not from the back seat, but at a large wooden table with 2 chairs facing each other as equals. "I've prepared a few things I'd like to say." Rachel began, her tone calmer than the last time they spoke. Jamal nodded, his hand resting lightly on the folder, as if accustomed to moments where others needed him more than they could admit. "I used to believe I was a fair leader, but I've realized I was only fair to those who looked like me." Jamal didn't interrupt. He let her continue, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them hear themselves. "So today, I'm not here to say thank you. I'm here to offer an opportunity." She slid an envelope across the table. "I want you to take the role of Executive Director of International Relations at Whitman Group, not because I owe you, but because I have never met anyone more qualified." Jamal opened the envelope. Inside was a contract and compensation package, a figure impressive even by industry standards. At the bottom of the final page, signed Rachel Whitman, CEO. He stayed silent for a long moment, then set the papers down. "You know, 3 years ago I was offered a similar position, but only if I agreed to stay silent about what I saw. And you refused. I couldn't sell the truth just to keep a title." Rachel bowed her head, and this time Jamal looked her in the eye. "This time I don't need anyone's permission to be in this room. I'll accept, but only if you understand I'll do more than advise. I will rebuild this system from how we hire to how we define a person's worth. You'll have full authority. Not just authority. I need commitment from you and the board." Rachel nodded. I lost talent because I was raised to believe success had a certain color. I'm ready to unlearn that day by day. Jamal smiled, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of a man who no longer had to strain just to be seen. He was visible. The following week at the boardroom meeting, Rachel entered a line of older faces, mostly white, mostly those who were legacy. I'd like to announce Whitman Group is officially appointing Jamal Carter as Executive Director of International Relations with signing authority on international deals and direct oversight of global strategy. A hand shot up Derek Langston's senior advisor, the same man who once muttered, "Don't trust drivers too much." Rachel, I have to ask, is this an emotional decision or guilt? Rachel looked him in the eye for the first time, not avoiding it. No, it's a strategic decision. In 6 weeks, Jamal secured partnerships with companies from Spain, Brazil, China, and Nigeria. In the last 10 years, our previous strategies gave us nothing but empty meetings and blind prejudice. Another board member interjected, "But what's his background?" "He was just a driver a few months ago." Rachel tapped the screen. A resume appeared. Georgetown, United Nations, 8 languages, over 50 cross-national negotiations. That's the background we never bothered to see because it didn't come from the places we were used to trusting. The room fell silent. And in that moment, Rachel understood she wasn't just appointing a man. She was dismantling an invisible classification system, one she had once helped uphold herself. Jamal entered the room following the successful vote. Rachel stood up and extended her hand. "Welcome to the executive team." Jamal shook her hand, not in submission, but as the start of something new. 1 year after being labeled a threat for knowing too many languages, Jamal Carter stood on the main stage of the International Business Ethics Conference in Geneva beneath the spotlight that now lit up a face once shut out of boardrooms, once ignored behind tinted car windows. Behind him, the LED screen displayed the words, "Bridging Cultures, Rewriting Power." Below, more than 500 delegates from around the world, from multinational CEOs and senior diplomats to young students seeking answers in an increasingly complex world, all had their eyes on a 35-year-old black man, calm-eyed, whose hands had once been seen as the help. Jamal wasn't reading from a script. He stepped forward, rested his hand on the wooden podium, and said, "I'm not standing here as an expert. I'm standing here as someone who was once cast out for speaking the wrong language." A hush swept across the auditorium. He continued, "I was once an international negotiator, but because I spoke Hausa during a meeting, I was branded as aligned with unclear forces. I lost my job not because I wasn't qualified, but because I didn't look like the decision makers." He paused, then looked directly at the front row where Rachel Whitman sat among other global leaders. "I was once a driver, ferrying the woman who runs the company I now lead globally. She once called the languages I spoke terrorist codes. She once didn't see me because she had never learned how to look." Rachel didn't flinch. Her face no longer carried pride, but the quiet humility of someone who had chosen to change. Jamal continued, not with bitterness, but with gravity. "The world doesn't need more people who speak well. It needs people who are willing to listen, to voices they're not used to hearing." Applause broke out. Not because it was novel, but because someone had lived through it and stood firm enough to say so. After the keynote, a Financial Times journalist approached Rachel Miss Whitman. "What made you trust Mr. Carter after everything?" Rachel smiled gently, her eyes following Jamal as he spoke with a delegate from Senegal. "Because I used to look at him through a fogged glass of prejudice. And now I've wiped it clean. and seen that he's one of the greatest minds this company has ever had. The reporter nodded. A bold decision. Rachel responded without hesitation. Not bold, just right. Back at the Whitman Group headquarters after the conference, Jamal stepped into his new office, a glass-wrapped corner suite overlooking the Hudson River. On his desk stood 3 small flags, the United States, Spain, and Nigeria. An email popped up on his screen. It was from a black college senior majoring in international relations. "Mr. Carter, I watched your speech. I used to believe diplomacy wasn't for people like me until today. Thank you for stepping on that stage, and for not staying silent." Jamal smiled, not out of pride, but because he knew that someone who once believed they didn't belong could now imagine themselves standing on any stage in the world. That afternoon, Rachel knocked on his office door. "They want to interview you, Jamal. The media, CNBC, TED Talk, Harvard Business Review." Jamal chuckled and shook his head. "I'll be selective about where I speak. Not because I need fame, but because I want the story told right." "You're still as cautious as the first day," Rachel noted. "No, I'm just clear now," Jamal replied, "because I'm not asking to be in this room anymore." I opened the door from the outside. Rachel was quiet. She understood. From this point forward, the world would need to get used to a new kind of leadership, one not born from privilege, but from experience. 1 year after the Geneva conference, Jamal Carter's office glowed with the afternoon sun. Digital maps of global partnerships lit up the large screen. A mahogany shelf displayed negotiation files and cultural research, and on top, a black-and-white photo of a young Jamal standing beside his father selling newspapers outside City Hall. He sat there, no meetings, no phone in hand, simply finishing a final line in the memoir. He began the night Rachel fired him, "I was once doubted," for knowing too much. In a world not ready to believe that someone like me could know anything at all. The door opened. Rachel entered. No heavy makeup, no planner in hand. Just a woman who owed another in a way that power could never define. "I just got back from the shareholder meeting," she said. "International revenue is up 67% year over year, and Jamal, they've requested you to deliver the keynote at the Global Shareholders Summit next month." Jamal wasn't surprised. He smiled. "I'll go. But this time I want to bring 3 people: an Asian American junior advisor, a female negotiator from the Middle East, and a black senior student majoring in linguistics. I've been mentoring them for the past 3 months. Rachel nodded. "You're building something bigger than yourself." "I don't want to sit alone in rooms that once shut me out," Jamal said. "I want to make more seats." She smiled, but tears shimmered in her eyes. "You've taught me so much. Not just about culture, but about how to live, how to apologize, and how not to repeat the same mistakes." Jamal looked out the window where Manhattan's skyline caught the golden light of dusk. "The world won't change because of a single speech," he said. "It changes when every person has the right to speak and is heard with respect." That night at the Leadership for Equity Awards, Jamal was named the man who rebuilt fairness in global trade. He walked onto the stage, no notes, no slogans, just a voice clear as a mountain spring. "I'm not extraordinary. I'm just the result of opportunities that should have been granted long ago. I represent those pushed aside for their names, their skin, or the languages they carry." He turned to the audience. "And today I want to say one last thing. We don't need to build a world where everyone is the same. We need to build a world where difference never means less." The entire room rose in applause. Not because he was a winner, but because he was real. He had lived hurt, persevered, and didn't keep that strength to himself. As the night grew late, Rachel and Jamal stepped out from backstage, City lights flickered like stars spilled across the street. Rachel quietly asked if you could send a message to yourself. On the day I fired you, what would you say? Jamal paused, then smiled. I'd say, don't stay silent, because behind the door that closes today, it is a room you will open for all those who've never been invited in. Prejudice may keep someone out of a room, but dignity and resilience will empower them to build a home where everyone has a seat. If this story touched something deep within you, please share it. Because somewhere out there, someone may also need a door opened.